This is the largest film in South Korea in the past decade. Due to the name issue, most netizens have not watched it. The entire plot of the movie is full of ups and downs, and there is no urine point throughout. As a suspense movie, reversal is essential. However, this movie only overturns all the previous stories with a last-minute reversal. It can only be said that the director and screenwriter will come to life, and the male and female leads were also nominated for Best Actor and Actress in both roles by Ching-long Volkswagen for this movie. Today we will walk into this masterpiece and see what kind of magic it has. The story takes place in 2016 in South Korea. A girl in a red dress is walking on the street when two strong men suddenly appear from beside her. In front of everyone, they push her into an ambulance. When the girl opens her eyes again, she is already locked up in a mental hospital. Since then, the hospital hallway has been filled with the mournful cries of girls every night, and this is just a shadow. As the screen changes, a year later, the male protagonist Dongji is being interviewed by a radio station, and he himself is actually a host. Recently, a program he hosts that tracks the truth has become popular, making him a popular traffic star that everyone pursues. However, halfway through the interview, the host suddenly received the news that the interview had been suspended. It turned out that someone had reported that Dongji was hosting a program that was fake, but now public opinion has become increasingly intense. Dongji, who received the news, hurriedly left the studio and called his boss to inquire. However, the result was that he had to resist everything, which made Dongji so angry that he cursed his mother. Although it was clear that the fake idea was the fault of his boss, he was asked to take responsibility for it. Out of anger, Dongji approached his boss to question him, only to be informed that he had been transferred to host a bizarre talk show. Dongji, who was a bit confused, was still the first brother of the radio station 1 second, and the next second he became the host of this boring program. Dongji really wanted to leave directly, but for the sake of life, he still chose to compromise. And in order to stabilize Dongji, the boss promised that as long as this program was done well, Dongji could return to its original department. Subsequently, Dongji followed his boss to the radio station and met his new partner, Xiao Jin. Through Xiao Jin's introduction, the production team has already had several filming locations, all of which are said to be places where supernatural events have occurred. Although Xiao Jin's introduction was passionate, Dongji was drowsy to hear it. As the former radio station leader, the public officials knew from the first listen that these places had no highlights, and even if they were broadcasted, there would be no ratings. When he was bored, he accidentally came across a diary on the table. Driven by curiosity, Dongji picked it up, and Xiao Jin explained that someone had specifically sent it to Dongji. It seems that some people thought Dongji was still tracking for 24 hours. After listening to it, Dongji opened the diary and found that the diary had obvious signs of being burned. By examining the content of the diary, he found that it was written by a woman who was forcibly locked up in a mental hospital. It told the various tortures he suffered in the mental hospital, and his words were filled with despair. In the words of a woman, that place is neither human nor hell, but it is a more terrifying place than hell. Seeing this, Dongji keenly captured the hot topic and asked Xiao Jin to make a plan based on this content, but he was told by Xiao Jin that the mental hospital had long been burned down, so he doubted the authenticity of this diary. But Toshiba is determined to shoot, and he believes that even if the content is fake, as long as he can shoot it, it will definitely become popular. Just a little bit strange about Toshiba. When he saw the signature Shoya in his diary, he always felt like he had heard the name somewhere, but couldn't remember it for a moment. The bug arrived quickly, and the next day, Dongji brought people to this abandoned hospital to shoot. Watching his colleagues perform exaggerated performances in front of him, Dongji felt quite scared and headache-stricken. If he were to catch up with this progress, he was afraid that he would never be able to return to his original department for the rest of his life. Feeling annoyed, he casually found a room to smoke a cigarette, but the cigarette had not been lit yet. Suddenly, a group of colleagues screamed and ran to him, fearing that they had seen Apao and their camera had also disappeared. This statement made Dongji furious. He didn't care about Apao and ALV, what he cared about was the most valuable camera in the team. So, under Dongji's leadership, a group of people anxiously searched for the camera in the corridor. Just as they were walking towards the door of a room, a figure suddenly emerged from inside. The group of people were instantly frightened and screamed, and only Dongji reacted and got up to chase after them. However, when Dong chased straight to the staircase, he found that the person had actually fallen down the stairs and passed out. In the end, Dongji and Xiao Jin took the man to the hospital. After a doctor's examination, it was found that the man had suffered serious burns before and did not receive timely treatment. Now, the wound is already covered with maggots. Due to the severity of the injury, it is necessary to provide the identity information of the injured person for treatment. But where would Dongji know the identity of the man? When he was worried, Dong-ji saw that the doctor was giving a man infusion, and the tattoo on the man's wrist was exactly the same as that in the diary. The owner of the tattoo in the diary is Han Jang-yu, a caregiver who helped Cheol-ha in a mental hospital. In order to confirm whether the man was Han Jang-yu, Dong-ji remained in the hospital until the man woke up and then took out his diary to inquire. However, when the man saw this diary, he suddenly became restless. And the abnormality here quickly attracted the doctors, so Dong-ji had to pause the inquiry. However, based on the man's reaction, it can be basically determined that he is Han Jang-yu, and he also knows Cheol-ha who writes a diary. It was not until then that Dong-ji completely believed in the content of the diary, and he also keenly sensed that this was an explosive news that could bring him back to his peak. So when he returned, he immediately began investigating the matter, but the results of the investigation were not satisfactory because he could not find any information about Cheol-ha, and there were no reports of the fire on the internet despite the large fire that occurred back then. This made Dong-ji anxious and unable to sleep all night until the next day when Xiao-jin told him that the reason there were no reports of fires online was because on the night of the fire, the director of the police station was shot and killed at home, which overshadowed other news. Upon hearing this, Dong-ji immediately searched for the director's murder and was shocked to find that the suspect arrested that night was actually Cheol-ha, and more importantly, Cheol-ha was actually the director's adopted daughter. The case seems to be getting more and more interesting here. A fire in a mental hospital, my daughter shoots the director's father, is there any connection here? So he was eager to find out the purpose of the truth, and the next morning he found his friend at the police station and learned about the case from him. When Cheol-ha was arrested, she refused to plead guilty and emphasized that he was locked in a mental hospital at the time of the incident. However, because his mother suddenly died before the incident and there was no hospitalization record of him in the mental hospital, the police suspected that he was trying to win the case. After pretending to be a crazy queen, Dong-ji successfully met Cheol-ha who was imprisoned with the help of friends. However, what made Dong-ji curious was that according to Cheol-ha, the diary was indeed his, but he did not remember who was actually acting as the intermediary. At this time, the winter solstice no longer cared about these things because he was eager to know the authenticity of the diary content, and why Cheol-ha had killed her adoptive father. Cheol-ha, who insisted that she had not killed her, was imprisoned in a mental hospital to prove that he was actually in a mental hospital at the time of the crime. He told the story of a nightmare-like life he experienced a year ago. That day, he returned home from work as usual, but suddenly he was stuffed into an ambulance by two strong men. Afterwards, he was taken to a strange place, and after confirming his identity, the other person inhumanely dragged him into the bathroom, shamefully stripped him of his clothes, and then used a toilet brush to clean his whole body. Then he was taken to see the dean, and it wasn't until then that he realized it was a mental hospital. He wanted to explain that it was a misunderstanding, but the mouthpiece made it impossible for him to say a word, and the dean only told him in a stern tone that he shouldn't think about going out again when he got here. Afterwards, with the dean's nod, two caregivers dragged him to the corner of the wall and carried out the first round of violence. And every day after that, life was like this, and if there was anything wrong, she would be beaten up. Until that day, the new caregiver Han Jang-yu fed him medicine, and Han Jang-yu's unintentional kindness made Cheol-ha seem to have grabbed a life-saving straw. She wrote a phone number on her medical record, begging Han Jang-yu to help him make the call, but when she pulled it, another caregiver saw her. In the end, this matter came to an end, and a so-called physical examination is conducted here every day. Patients must stand barefoot on the cold floor, in a row, waiting for the dean's examination. On that day, a girl found Cheol-ha and nervously complained that she was not sick and was sleeping at home. She was forcibly arrested here. This immediately resonated with Cheol-ha, as he was also suddenly forcibly arrested. He thought that women were normal people like him, so he urgently asked if he knew how to get out. The woman pondered for 2 seconds and actually told Cheol-ha a way, which was to seek help from the perverted man next door. As she was speaking, the woman suddenly hugged Cheol-ha and desperately wanted to take off her clothes. It seemed that the woman was no longer normal now. It wasn't long before Cheol-ha had her turn for a physical examination, and he instinctively wanted to refuse. However, he was tightly held down by two strong men behind him. Later, Cheol-ha said a word, and the dean prescribed him an additional medicine. In the end, he even determined that he had delusional symptoms and needed to double the medication. It seems that this place is not ordinary darkness. Even normal people can become abnormal after this treatment, and the darkness here is far more than that. Every night at 11 o'clock, a girl's door will automatically open, and then he will hum a song to go to the dean's office. What exactly happened inside? I won't provide too much description, I understand if I understand. What's even more terrifying is that Cheol-ha also discovered that people in the United States will be pushed to the operating room for a period of time, and since then, she will never see that person again. Under these multiple pressures, Cheol-ha decided to run away because he didn't know if he would be the next one pushed to the operating room. On that day, Cheol-ha suppressed her fear and contacted the perverted man next door. After questioning, the other party did know a secret passage, but if Cheol-ha wanted to know, she had to go to the bathhouse to see him early tomorrow morning. Upon hearing this, Cheol-ha also understood the purpose of the perverted man, but it didn't matter if he wanted to escape. When it was time to let out the breeze the next day, Cheol-ha nervously walked into the bathroom, and the pervert had already been waiting here for a long time. He couldn't wait to have something to do with Cheol-ha, so he took the initiative to reveal the secret passage, which was located in the dean's room, and even revealed the room password of the dean's room. After obtaining what she wanted, Cheol-ha obediently squatted down slowly, but the next second the perverted man let out a scream and then collapsed to the ground, clutching his thigh. The screams quickly attracted everyone, while Cheol-ha took advantage of the chaos to sneak to the entrance of the dean's office. However, what broke him was that the twisted and difficult-to-say password was actually wrong. Just when he didn't know what to do, the girl who often frequented the dean's office suddenly ran to Cheol-ha and begged her to output the password. And this girl didn't know whether she was really stupid or fake stupid. After breaking free from Cheol-ha's hand, she ran to a deserted corner and pressed the password against the wall. And Cheol-ha followed the girl's instructions and indeed opened the door. She hurriedly entered the room to search for the passage. After some searching, she finally found the entrance to the passage in a cabinet. However, at this moment, the door password suddenly rang, and the dean walked in immediately. Fortunately, Cheol-ha's reaction was fast enough, and he had already dodged into the passage. However, at this moment, he was suspended in mid-air, relying solely on his hands holding onto an iron pipe to support him. Due to the lack of focus on his feet, he quickly slid down due to physical exhaustion. Unfortunately, a steel bar underneath happened to cut through his clothes. The sound was just heard by the dean, and he was also scratched by the cold steel bars on his skin. Blood dripped down his body onto his toes, but Cheol-ha dared not make any sound. Suddenly, there was a loud noise coming from above. Cheol-ha looked up and met the dean's cannibalistic gaze. Accompanied by the dean's roar, Cheol-ha also fell from a high place. Fortunately, he quickly regained consciousness, got up, and in pain, limped towards the bright spot. Finally, he saw the sunshine, breathed in fresh air, and looked at everything around him. It was like a dream, and he finally ran out alive. He walked aimlessly on the bustling streets barefoot, wearing blood-stained clothes. Suddenly, an ambulance stopped by the roadside, and two men dressed in black rushed towards Cheol-ha. Cheol-ha saw it and immediately stood on her head, running wildly on the street. Fortunately, he had good luck. Before being caught, he stopped a passing police car. So, he was finally safe. The female police officer in the car comforted him and said she would take him to a safe place. But as soon as the police car stopped and Cheol-ha got off the car, two caregivers rushed out next to him and grabbed him tightly. Later, they even dragged him away in front of the police. Originally, the police and the hospital were working together. At this moment, Cheol-ha was not only desperate, but also desperate. As the screen turned, he was already tied to the operating table, while the nearby dean had just completed an organ removal surgery. However, this scene was seen by the new caregiver Han Jang-yu, who had just learned that there was still organ trading here. After leaving the operating room, he was in great pain. Only then did he understand how his high salary came about. However, in the end, his conscience gained the upper hand. He found the number given by Cheol-ha and dialed her. Across from her was Cheol-ha's boyfriend, and he had been searching for the missing Cheol-ha. Therefore, after receiving the call, he rushed to the hospital without stopping. After successfully connecting with Han Jang-yu, the two of them sneaked into the operating room and left. Cheol-ha. Just as his boyfriend was about to leave with Cheol-ha on his back, he was blocked by the dean and all three of them were arrested. Cheol-ha's repeated escapes completely angered the dean, so he decided to remove her boyfriend's organs in front of Cheol-ha without using anesthesia. No matter how Cheol-ha begged, her boyfriend was ultimately tied to the operating table. Afterwards, the dean actually picked up a tool and cut into Cheol-ha's boyfriend's stomach. The pain made him struggle fiercely on the operating table, but the dean's cold eyes never changed. Just then, a caregiver suddenly reported that the dean's office was on fire, and it was the girl who could enter and exit the dean's office who caused the fire. Upon hearing this, the dean quickly threw down his tools and rushed into the office that had become a raging fire, because the office had the wealth he had accumulated for half his life. Meanwhile, Cheol-ha took this opportunity to break free and save her boyfriend from the operating table. Just as he left, Han Jang-yu looked at the people struggling for help in the hospital room. With a kind heart, he rushed back. Perhaps his injury was left at this moment, and Cheol-ha's boyfriend couldn't walk anymore. Because the wound on his stomach was too severe, he prayed to Cheol-ha to leave alone quickly. However, in the blank space of their conversation, a figure covered in fire suddenly hugged her boyfriend and dragged him into the sea of fire, while Cheol-ha could only watch helplessly scream. As the screen rotates, time returns to the present moment. After listening to the entire story, Dongji felt a deep pain in his heart. He couldn't imagine how Cheol-ha survived after experiencing all of this. But he still had a question in his heart, which was why Shoya was caught as the murderer that night, because throughout the entire story, Shoya's deputy director did not appear. However, when he asked a question, Shoya suddenly felt particularly painful, constantly saying that his father had already died, as if his brain was deliberately avoiding this stepfather. And when Dongji took out a few photos of Shoya's stepfather, Shoya went completely crazy upon seeing them. She then told a little-known story. It turned out that since her mother married her stepfather, the stepfather often gave her sleeping pills in her water, and then invaded Shoya while her mother was asleep. The reason why he was locked up in a mental hospital was also signed by his stepfather, because there was a valuable piece of land under her mother's name that was originally reserved for Shoya. But because he was locked up in a mental hospital, DP naturally fell into the hands of his stepfather. And he accidentally learned from the hospital that the reason why the hospital dared to sell organs was due to the presence of his stepfather, the director behind it. That night when he fled the hospital, he saw his stepfather also coming down from that building, so he followed him all the way back home. He thought of 10,000 ways to kill his stepfather in his heart, but to his surprise, as soon as he arrived at his doorstep, he heard gunshots coming from inside the house. When he entered, he saw his stepfather lying in a pool of blood, and he was inexplicably mistaken for the murderer. At this point, the story has basically been told. After multiple verifications, Dongji, who returned home, confirmed that the hospital had shares in the director, so he was prepared to plead justice for Shoyang. Moreover, this was also an opportunity for him to turn over. But when he went to the hospital to testify with Han Jang-yu, he found out that he had already left at some point. Helplessly, Dongji could only organize the existing information and then use the media to explain the whole story. Jiang Qing also emphasized that according to the information he obtained from interviews with people inside the police station, when the police chief died and the police station was in chaos, he quickly identified Shoya as the murderer. In fact, Shoya was the real victim. This incident has already been broadcasted and instantly became popular all over the internet, and below the video are all netizens who are calling out for justice for Shoya. In the end, the police station couldn't withstand the pressure, and the current director apologized. The court quickly responded and conducted a retrial of the case, as all parties had died and only Shoya was the only survivor. Therefore, his words were all accepted by the court. Combined with various clues found by Dongji, Shoya was ultimately acquitted, and by this point in the story, it seems that it has come to a successful end. Shoya happily regained her mother's land, and Dongji returned to the radio station to become the first brother. No matter how you look at it, they are all a safe winner in life. But when Dongji went to deliver the acquitted Shoya back home, Shoya got off the car and told Dongji with a pen that such sharp objects could also become weapons, so they would never be given to patients in psychiatric hospitals. This statement made Dongji's scalp tingle instantly. Since he couldn't compare himself to the patient, how did he write this diary in front of him? And the story only begins here. Today, after turning around and entering the house, Shoya took off her top, and there was a scar on her stomach that was striking. What's even more eerie is that Shoya calls her dad to the man in the photo, and isn't this man actually going to save her boyfriend? What's going on here? It turned out that all of this was a beautiful lie. It was her mother who was locked up in a mental hospital, and it was her who went to save people. And the reason why Dongji feels familiar with the name Shoya is because Shoya called her for help, but she was too busy to take it seriously. In the end, the person who was dragged into the flames was also her mother, and it was really she who shot and killed her stepfather. This whole story is a plot that involves Dongji to help Shoya get rid of her charges. At the end of the story, the director left a suspense. Shoya brewed 2 cups of tea, then walked to the window and opened the curtains. At that moment, a knocking sound came from outside the door. Some people said it was Dongji, who had figured everything out, knocking on the door, while others said it was Han Jang-yu, who had suddenly disappeared, knocking on the door. Who was the person knocking on the door? Welcome to leave a comment in the comment section for discussion.